You may be, confused as to why I'm up here. I am here to prevent you from going to dinner right now. I'm here to be in the way. So why am I talking here, honestly, tonight?
We love you, Mike.
That's obvious. I am talking, I'm going to make a point out of this.
Did you just take that picture?
No, this is a picture from last year? This is why we're here, right? We love each other, honestly. Can I just be real? We love each other. That's why we're showing up here. I mean, I have to mention that I host a tavern on Zoom call. So, because I live in Hawaii, so I host a tavern all around the world. Sometimes it's at breakfast time where I live, and we have a bunch of members who've come to this tavern. And there's one in particular in the back. Martin came all the way from Germany. Martin, am I going to get your last name right? Krake?
Sounds good.
All right. So, danke. Why is this picture still up? I want to get rid of it. But I wanted to tell you, this is the talk that I'm giving, and it's called The Gamification of Religion. Religion is something that in the past was not ideological. It maybe had ideological elements, but it was about us gathering together. We are here, gathered together, right? Every wedding starts that way, maybe funerals start that way. Religion is something that we do together as mammals and as humans, right? To inspire each other, to put the hand on the back, to make sure, I love you, I care about you, I'm noticing that you're going through a tough time, or you seem to be doing great, maybe you can contribute that energy in a productive way over here. That's something that religion, institutions of religion, gatherings of religion have done for us. So today, I'm going to talk about something that I do think concerns your health, which is, do you meet up with friends on a regular basis? That's deafening silence right now that I'm getting from this room when I say, do you meet up with friends on a regular basis? So I'm going to get into why gamify religion. I'm not talking about a particular religion, by the way. Some of you have religious differences. This can really apply to any religion or set of ideas, even just parenting. If you're parenting your children, you effectively have to have a home religion, right? Because that's the culture that your children live in. How do you make that a game? So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. This slide is the presentation. Gamification, teaching with games. Everybody got that? Okay, next slide. Now, what are the advantages of gamifying? What are the advantages over education? This is something that I think you don't get in the school system, and you certainly don't even get, I've been a tutor for, I don't know how long, 20 years? 20 years. 20 years at the end of this year. You can't teach every possible lesson by explaining it did any of you have kids in this room? Do you have children? Have you ever tried to explain something to your child and it either it becomes like the perpetual why, how does that work loop? Or you're at a loss for words and you don't even know how you could possibly explain this to someone. Games fill in that gap for you. So we're going to talk about that. Also, the thing about Bryan Brey, our illustrious Bryan Brey here, he and I have talked a lot on these taverns that I've hosted about the...
you guys talked about women cigars?
No. We do sometimes, but we generally gravitate on, Curt, to higher things. I had to really stretch my collar out to get that disgust out of my... No, I'm kidding. So play circuitry. Bryan has brought this up. Jaak Panksepp, I believe is the name of the fellow, neuroscientist who has studied play circuitry in mammals. Okay, we have circuitry in our brains designed to play. So why not use it? Why not use it or lose it? Gaming, you can also solve higher complexity problems, and of course, gaming can be social. What are some of the problems with games, though? Well, there are some disadvantages, there are some risks. You might be teaching the wrong lesson. My dad thought he was teaching me golf during my teenage years, but he didn't realize he was teaching me to hate golf. Now, I actually like golf. I like golf. I like it now, but the game that I kept finding myself in my teenage years never gave me a chance, and it wasn't really his fault. He didn't know. He was doing what he thought was right, which is, I want to play the game with my son, but it wasn't teaching the right lesson, the way that the game is set up. So we're going to talk about how do we set that up. Another thing about games is that we talked about drugs earlier. Games can be drugs. I saw a point somewhere online, I don't remember who I learned it from, that effectively the reason why the Apple VR headset flopped is because you don't need to develop a more addictive technological device. I mean, half of you are on your phones right now looking at them, doing things possibly that are necessary. But if you look at children out in school or wherever, they're all on their phones and they're all watching these YouTube shorts or TikToks. And 90 seconds for a video is all you need to get the dopamine firing, etc. And that's a perfect addiction machine. You don't need a VR headset. How much more virtual reality do you need than a screen in front of your face? So that's why I think that thing flopped, is that we've already reached peak addiction in terms of our technology. Also, there might be flaws in your game. There might, a bad game teaches bad lessons. I'm going to talk about some bad games later. And games tend to introduce novelty as a substitute for complexity. A lot of new games do this. We're going to talk about the Lindy effect. Some of you might have encountered that from Nassim Taleb. We're going to talk about Lindy games today. And some games are antisocial. I mean, how many of you go home and play video games alone and you get it. So, and then we have religion. What's the goal of religion? Mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is a big word, but mindfulness in this room means being able to account for everything. Can you account for your own behavior? And then from there, can you account for the behavior of others? Can you account for changes in capital? I mean, I'm aware, right, that some of you are hungry. I mean, dinner isn't until 8, but some of you are hungry. So that's a change in capital. There's less energy available in your body to do useful work. The most useful work you can do right now is to absolutely enjoy my presentation. But if you can't manage that, it might not be because I'm not that good at presenting or you're not that good at listening. You may just not have enough energy in your bodies to do it. And as long as I keep talking and rambling up here, I'm going to delay you getting energy. No. And then selection pressures.
You got to remember, it's a good trade-off,
though. Say that again?
That's a good trade-off.
It could be a good trade-off. Right now, it could be really, really good for you. Selection pressures. How many of you have ever thought about selection pressures in a game if your name is not Luke Weinhagen? Luke, put your hand down. I want everyone to just take a look over there at our homegrown Luke Weinhagen. Luke is the guy who thinks... Luke is the one who understands proxies for selection pressures and brings it up in almost every discussion that I hear the giants at the Natural Law Institute when they're talking online. I always hear Luke bringing up selection pressure. I love that gets introduced. I want to bring that into games. And games will also teach your group evolutionary strategy or your group strategy. Maybe not an evolutionary strategy, maybe not a genetic strategy, but just what's our family group strategy? What does winning look like for our family?
Rush B.
Some of us know that, and some of us don't know what that is. So, mindfulness, right? I would say that in the Natural Law Institute, we talk about that there are 3 means of human coercion. There's force, there's trade or bribing, remuneration, and then there is, persuasion. And I divided that up here into war, trade, and family. I mean, the tools that we have to persuade people, I don't think were made so that a bunch of, from an evolutionary standpoint, I don't think we were invented our means of persuasion were invented so that multinational corporations could basically bribe you bribe you to give up your future generations and your future offspring, just so that you could have a bunch of experiences in an amusement park of a modern city. I think that sums it up. If I missed something, call it out in the room right now. Okay, I don't think, our entire world, right? I don't think that the reason that we have the ability to persuade someone as an animal, right, is because we want to make these corporations richer, all right, and enslave ourselves further. No, we do this because I have a 4-year-old son. When he falls down, I persuade him to get back up and take it like a man. Yeah, it hurts. Oh, I get you. Notice that it doesn't help to cry, though. It actually doesn't make you feel better screaming. Yeah, you're right, Dad. It doesn't actually feel better. Wow, it's already over. I don't even feel anything anymore, right? And that's not suppression of feelings. I'm not telling him to suppress his feelings. But at a certain point, if you've had children, you know, right, that the crying keeps going even after the stimulus is gone. Because they're now reacting to the shock Psychologically, they're not reacting to the boo-boo. Yeah, they want your attention. So, gosh, what a great looking family. All right, so, yeah, great war, great trade, great family. All right. So, I think this chart, I don't need to go into all the details of this, but when you make a child mindful of war, right, and children at the age of 4, at the age of 5, they start asking, Daddy, Mama, what's a war? I get asked that question. My child is 4.5. So I had to teach him, right? Well, there's 3 wars on the planet right now. I told him where the wars are. We looked at a globe. And then I told him about the war of the mind. The war of the mind, where we're convinced into having bad ideas, ideas that harm us rather than help us. He's 4. He doesn't need to know all the details, right? We're going to get into that this weekend. He doesn't need to know those details, but he does need to know you have to monitor your own mind and make sure, is someone feeding you the right ideas? Trade, I think for the people who are new here, well, let me go to family first. Family, cooperation, support, and forbearance. That's another Luke Weinhagen classic word here. To reframe tolerance, what we typically call tolerance for misbehavior, we actually mean the word forbearance when we apply it to those we love, to our families. We want to forbear their mistakes, not really tolerate them. Tolerating mistakes means the mistakes never get fixed, but if you can forbear the mistakes, you might have the chance to fix it later. And then trade's kind of like the middle thing. If someone's not in your family and you're not fighting them, what can you do with them? Well, we have time on this earth together, and you have something I have, and I have something you have, and maybe we want to exchange it. So that's how trade works. And for developing trade, a child has to understand reciprocity. That's a core concept in the Natural Law Institute. I took that coughing as cheering for reciprocity, so do it again. Reciprocity, most important word of the new millennium. And I'm going to get into something later in this talk, something about exchange value as opposed to intrinsic value. Children, maybe the first 10 years, you teach them that they have intrinsic value. Mommy loves you, daddy loves you, will never throw you out to the wolves. That's important that you tell that to a child, maybe not the wolves part, but make sure that they know that they're always welcome back in the home. Then they get to 13, 14, 15, and their teachers start asking them to do things. Their peers start asking them to do things, and that's where you have to help a child graduate from the idea of intrinsic value to exchange value. I create value and I exchange value with others. I am not valuable just on my own accord. I mean, I am valuable, but not merely intrinsically valuable. So we'll talk about that. And then simulation, right? You guys understand the idea that a game is simulating a real thing, whereas a lesson or a lecture, like I'm doing right now, doesn't really simulate a real thing. The only thing I'm simulating right now is how ludicrous my mind is and verbalizing it outwards. That's what's being simulated right now. Okay, and I want to come back to lastly to game night. We're going to talk about game night. It's not going to be tonight, but if you have families back where you're from, consider revitalizing the neighborhood by inviting your friends and family over. Extended friends and family over, and having more games present. And I'm going to explain why that is in this. Twister is one of the best. Twister's one of the best. In fact, I'm imagining like a big house, like grandma's house, or a big house. You got Twister over here, you got stuff over here, all kinds of different games on different levels. All right, so I want to talk about some games that I think have survived for a long time. Not because they're necessarily like to be praised or anything, but they've survived because they have pedagogical value. I want to start with chess. So chess is on the category of war. Nobody plays chess because they want to learn how to trade or cooperate, right? In chess, the goal is you scalp the enemy king, right? Chess, does anyone know the history of chess? I don't want to go into it, honestly, but most of you guys probably know it's been around for over 1,000 years. It's an Indo-European game. It started as, I think, Shatranj in India, where the bishops can only move 2 squares, I think, diagonally. And then the modern forms of chess, I think, make their way through Turkey and then into Europe. If you look at a chessboard, there's some interesting features that never get mentioned. And if you teach a child chess is not just a game that you play for dopamine, for cheap tricks, but you're actually trying to teach them how to wage a war. There's something it's interesting that you learn from watching chess. For example, chess assumes perfect loyalty of your troops. Is that always true?
No.
No. So when you're teaching a child a chess game, you're assuming, hey, this is how you would wage a war. provided that your troops are loyal. So if you can't get your troops to be loyal, that's a separate problem that you're going to have to solve before you teach your prince how to play chess with what's on the field. Another thing about chess is that chess, if you play it at all, it's mostly about getting your pieces to be on their best squares and to have your enemy's pieces be on their worst squares. It's kind of like put your men and women really in the best position where they can thrive and shine on your team. And if you're waging war against an enemy, stultify them. Make it so that it's hard for them to put their best people in their best roles. Make it that they have to play roles that they're not used to playing. We even see this in games like basketball and football, where a big guy has to defend a small guy or vice versa. They're not in the right role for the situation. Another thing about chess, I made a little chart here if you want to look at it. On this column here, you have the objects in chess. So we talk about ranks. Those are the gradations that you move up on the chessboard. There's the files, that's the vertical. So ranks are horizontal, files are vertical, squares, pawns, knights, bishops, rooks, queen, king. I'm not going to read everything here, but what you can kind of see is that every sort of personality that fights in a war, more or less, right? You talk about advancement. You need to have a good classification of where your troops are, or organize your troops. That's the concept of a file. That's why it's called a file. So if you're a prince, you have to keep a good file on everybody. Keep a file on them. Squares, right? Location, coordinates. It also corresponds to your sphere of influence. Knights, I like them because they jump. They're brawlers. They're jumpy. They're jumpy people. If you want to think about knights from a historical perspective, right? If you're Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain in 1492 after the Reconquista, you have a lot of surplus knights in your country from fighting that war. And they're a little jumpy, if you know what I mean, and they like to drink. So maybe we need to send them, I don't know, to North America, because we might have too many of them here. And when there's a surplus of unmarried men, that conditions are ripe for a war. Something to think about. I think what's interesting is that the king is really the decision maker, and the king has to move one square at a time, and you as a player have to make one move at a time. So you actually are empathizing with the king in a game of chess. The game forces you to empathize with the king. That's something I think is interesting. This is kind of a silly diagram. It's the same position as before, but you can see I scrolled in some pink squares. Can you all see that white knight? I'm not trying to white knight right here, but if you can see that white knight, the pink squares are the squares that he can jump to. And this bishop, this opposing bishop that's right next to him, can cover all these blue squares. I was looking at this chess position, something like this, months ago, and it dawned on me, this is teaching a lesson in medieval history. If I want to keep an eye on my enemy's knights, put a bishop or a clergyman next to them. Because you can see right here, 4 of the knight squares that he could jump to are covered by the bishop. Now, who knows if that's actually the lesson to be drawn from studying a game of chess? But what I'm saying is if you're teaching your children chess, don't just play 20 games or 10 games for the dopamine. Pause the game and say, son, daughter, what historical event could this position be simulating or reminding you of? There are so many different possible chess positions, and if you consider the personalities on the board, each chess position is kind of describing a particular historical battle. In this particular battle, the knight is struggling to get free away from that bishop. So that's just something to kind of think about. I brought up Thomas à Becket and Henry III, right? Didn't Henry III say to some knight, I wish someone could rid me of this, of Dr. Brad, you know this. And whether the knight heard him correctly or didn't, Thomas à Becket is now buried in, it's a beautiful and kind of striking grave. But there's a theme here. A lone bishop cannot checkmate a king. Thomas à Becket was unable to checkmate Henry III, even by excommunicating him from the church. So it's something to kind of think about. In chess, you need 2 bishops working 2 different colors of squares. What do the colors of squares mean? Maybe they're different ideologies, right? Another thing that's interesting is that bishops attack you at an angle. It's kind of funny to think about a clergyman, a person who makes a living out of spinning words and telling stories, attacking you from the angle, right? Whereas the rook, the garrison, so to speak, hits you head on. Moving on to another game. This is a game involving trade, playing cards. So I have it up on screen here. The terminology of playing cards, anyone ever thought about where these words come from? Why are they called suits? They are called ranks of cards. Why are they called ranks? What is being discussed here? What is a hand of cards? What is a jack? Jack of all trades, master of none, jack in the box, jackass. That word jack is very poignant in the English language. It has a long history. I'm claiming here that a jack is basically a king who doesn't want the responsibility of being a king. So he's a kind of lesser aristocracy that gets to, philosophize all day and do things and not really have to take any responsibility in the big picture for like hosting a conference or making sure that the trains run on time or anything, because he enjoys the privilege of being able to, anyways. And then a queen, right? I say that a queen, the feminine, right? You have the feminine in the royalty. I think of a gracious queen, invitation. Not the Alice in Wonderland Queen of Hearts, but just the gracious queen. So I put the queen as articulating demand and the marketplace. So the queen could stand for essentially the liaison for the marketplace. The mother who helps the children figure out, what do you need? What do you need right now? What are your demands? The king, on the other hand, is the decider of last resort, just like in chess, and the insurer of last resort. The king is on the money in any functioning currency. Our currency is kind of weird because we put a bunch of dead people on our currency. So if you have a problem with the money system in America, there's no one, you have to look at a picture of George Washington, like he had anything to do with this mess that we're in today. Whereas the current, King of England is on the British currency. So that's the guy you go to if, you need to take him up on what the problems are in the monetary system. So we diffuse responsibility even through our currency, but if you study the playing cards, you'll kind of see this was back in the day, that's why the king put their face on the coin. And then ace, this is kind of a weird one. I looked up the history of playing cards. I looked up a lot of the history of tarot. Ace, I'm making a guess here. I think it's a transliteration of Jesus, like the Latin Jesus. So I think ace is actually a slang term for Jesus. But even if it isn't, the ace, the one, you can think of it as the first principles or the unit of measure. Ace sort of ranks higher than a king in certain cases in card games, but then also is the lowest rank. So I think that's an interesting feature that's shown in almost all card games. Why is... What's that? It's the first and the last. And I'll just go into it. If you have a royal flush, let's just say, a king that puts the ace above himself is a wise king. He's studying the unit of measure. He's studying the first principles of rule. A king that wants to be that doesn't put the ace above him, well, he's powerful. He's a tyrant, but he's certainly in power. But doesn't necessarily mean that he has the wisdom to be king.
In the tarot, I think that would correspond with the Fool because it's the beginning and the end.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Well, there's the Joker.
And based on tarot, also, we're going to get into something called the suits. I think of it as the suits that we wear. I found the research on tarot particularly enlightening here. If you look at hearts, the suit of hearts, in tarot it's cups. And I don't, we're going to be doing this later. Cups is kind of like your tribe. It's who you drink with. Raise your cups. Cup of Christ. Holy chalice. Yeah, it could have a lot of different meanings. I don't want you thinking that what I put up here is necessarily how you're going to communicate your family religion to your children on game night, but this is what I'm going to be teaching my son. I have it all worked out. I like also this idea of spades. You guys get the idea that a spade is a digging tool and that anything you do with a spade involves relentless repetition of emotion. So any career where you have to attack it again, like in sales, any relentless energy, that's a spade job. But also being a landlord, being a landscaper, that's also a spade job. Being a soldier, that's a spade job. Being a farmer, that can be a spade job. Whereas the clubs are kind of like wizards. The wizards like to be in their own club, don't they? They like to form clubs where they play games. And what's the purpose of playing all these games? Well, they're looking for the holy grail, the leverage seeker, the multiplier, the one strategy that wins the game. Think about golf, right? You hit a golf ball with clubs. You're trying to hit the ball in the hole with the fewest number of strokes. So whereas spades are about relentless attacking many times, clubs is about can you get it done in the fewest number of steps. I think diamonds is self-explanatory. Celebrity, money, the mercantile class. That's diamonds. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. The hands were dealt. That's an interesting term, right? A hand of cards. I think a hand is basically, you've ever heard the saying, you are like the 5 people that you know the most or that you spend the most time with. It's interesting that most hands of cards involve like 5 or 7. It's kind of like the size of a group of people that you might be relating to in present time. Do you have to get rid of certain cards in your hand to upgrade your life? Maybe you have to make a trade. Of course, you don't know what new cards you're going to be dealt. You're taking a risk. Bird in the hand, 2 in the bush kind of thing. And I have the different hands ranked in poker. I think it's an interesting study in poker. Why is a flush worth more than a straight? Sure, it's more rare probabilistically. That's not the reason why a flush is worth more than a straight, right? This game didn't survive for 1,000 years just because of simple mathematical probabilities. It would not be a very fun game to play. It would not be an interesting game to play if it were simply a math game and you had to simply calculate probabilities in poker. So when I play through a hand of poker with my child, I don't play through 10 hands. I play through 1 hand, and we talk about, who do you have in your hand? Well, I've got the 3 of clubs. Who's that guy? Well, that's like a wizard who's low on the pay scale. Maybe like a math tutor. No, I'm more like a 7 of clubs, I think. But like, who is the 4 of spades? Well, that's like a digger type, maybe the guy working on the highway. 2 would be the lowest pay scale, or ace would be the lowest of the pay scale. Let's see here, a flush. When you're all of the same suit in a room, you're more compatible. You get one another. You have the same base of experience because you're all suited for the same work. A straight is more interesting. Why would a straight be worth more? What's the deal with a straight? I think it's just the compatibility of ranks, right? If you have people who are adjacent in rank, they're going to be able to relate to one another. So if you have 5 in a row adjacent in rank, you have established compatibility amongst the members in your ranks. Let's see here. Yep, your current 5-man team, winning hand, outcompetes others somehow, at least in poker. There's other games with cards like bridge or gin rummy. Mostly what gin is as a game is it's just teaching a child, can you organize your team? You have to know the suits. Gin's not a very particularly difficult game, by the way. Has anyone ever played War? The game of War? Yeah, my 4-year-old son loves War. Yeah, my 4-year-old son loves War. War is basically like no one is in control of who wins, and you have to just know which card is higher. That's all it takes to know how to play the game of War. But it's a useful game for my son because he doesn't know the ranks of the cards yet. So War is a game that you teach with a 4-year-old, but then maybe rummy comes in when you're 9 or 10 or 11, and then poker comes in when you're, 12 or competing on the World Series of Poker circuit. All right, so this is now another thing that NLI we talk about a lot, sortition. This is a major, major, major concept, and this is actually going to bring me to the heart of my talk. What is the purpose of playing games? I'm arguing it is to have fun, but it's not merely to have fun. Game night, or organizing large-scale games for children and for adults, accomplishes sortition. Think about it. You have a big house, you have a bunch of different games out. Which games would you want to play? Clearly, it's going to be the games that you think you have a chance of winning and having fun with other players. You are not going to want to play, for example, chess with me. If you're not good at chess, you're going to get wiped off the board. And similarly, I am not going to want to play poker with anyone in this room who has any good, if you have good luck with the stock market, basically. Like, I don't want to play poker with you because you probably know things about how to bet and how, et cetera, that I am just not going to be able to keep up with you. So I might play poker in a weaker cohort, or I might play a different card game. When you look at the division of labor across timescales, you see that these suits are kind of, they spell that out, right? Like the hearts people, they're living in the now. It's now. All right, if you're a mom, right, you have to be on call now. You're on call right now. But also caretakers and even live entertainers, they're on call right now. Then there are people who have a time frame of now and later. The merchants, they sell to you in the now. They got to get your attention now, or maybe steal your attention now. But they're looking to sell you something that takes you past the sale, where you think, okay, this might benefit me later as well as now. Now to much later, that would be infrastructure. And that's spades, right? Like digging out big projects. That's something that you're doing it now, but you actually are doing this for, let's say, the 30 years or the 100-year return. And then the wizards who study these like eternal laws, if you will, well, they're thinking on a very, very long time scale. They might not like digging, they might not like caretaking, and they might not like merchandising, but they certainly like discovering rules, principles, or forms of leverage. So the question is, how do you sort people out without ordering them around? And there's a pun there, right? Because you're ordering people, putting them in an order. How do you sort them out? I claimed that you. I claim that you can. Yeah, you can do that with games. All right. There are certain games that I think are bad. You can play them if you want, but I don't think Monopoly, for example, is a game worth playing if you don't have a fat stack of cash. And I'm talking about in real life. I'm not talking about the silly game by Parker Brothers of Monopoly. I'm not going to enter venture capital as a field if I don't have a fat stack of chips to gamble away. It's something that I don't have the head start necessary to get in. I'm going to have to apprentice if I want to get into that field. I have to apprentice or get in some other way. We talk about large corporations. A lot of these large corporations, as long as they can just keep people's attention diluted and distracted, they hold the cards, they hold the chips, and so they wind up collecting more of the chips as the game goes on. Another thing about games, I brought this up earlier, it's almost impossible to design a new game that teaches a lesson that you would want. I mean, can you think of a game that you could just invent to teach your child how to put their toys away that's actually an interesting game to play?
I have the same problem with a narrative. There's only, once you understand the logic of narratives, we're running out of narrative, which I think...
Yes.
Running out of narratives.
That's a great point.
That's why part of the reason postmodernists, they try to make living by talking about whiny stuff, because it's the opposite of the hero's journey.
Yeah, I think we're on like the 40th Star Wars movie at this point because there just aren't new stories that are compelling enough for people. So there's a Lindy effect. If a story's been around for 1,000 years, it's likely to survive another 1,000. If a story's only been around for 5 years, it's likely not going to survive another 5 years. So these games I mentioned, like chess. By the way, did my game of Go, did the game of Go show up or not?
There it is.
Okay, this is another great game. And the thing about chess, whereas chess has perfect loyalty, Go has perfect anti-loyalty. No one is loyal to you in Go. The way that Go works is that if you surround a cluster of your enemies' squares, they flip to your color. I actually argue that warfare we would say in a broad kind of way, you could say that Asian or East Asian warfare Go would come from East Asia because essentially when you have an overpopulated area, right near the rice fields of India or China, near the river valleys, you have billions of people there, you're not going to, the way that you win is by surrounding people with your culture and converting them essentially to your framework. Whereas in chess, that doesn't happen. You just play, right through. You just play to annihilate the enemy. So it's like Western versus Eastern forms of warfare. I like this quote here, no one remembers who they really are. That's kind of the lesson of Go when you're dealing with the masses. Like nobody remembers anything. And I think we're seeing that in America today, that, most people don't know why we have the rules that we have or the culture that we have, etc. Okay, so we talked about, one final thing I want to talk about with the poker hands, think about a pair as a cartel, right? Like why is a pair of eights worth more than a king? Well, what if the two eights go on strike? So when you think about four of a kind, that's like, why would 4 twos, people at the lowest pay scale, but if they united from 4 different suits, why would they have more leverage in a business environment than 3 kings? Think of it from the standpoint of what do these cartels control and what can they possibly blockade as well. So here's my call to action. Organize the elders and kids all together, play games. The little kids can play war, like I said, basic counting games, and the older kids can graduate to more complex games. Game night is a way for parents to teach their teenage children how to flirt with chaperones around. Think about that.
Say it again?
Game night is a way for parents to teach their teenage children how to properly flirt
Damn, that's brilliant.
with chaperones around. And nobody under the age of 15 understands that that's the true dynamic of what's going on. That was actually the image that came into my mind before I even launched this talk. So that's the vision I want you to take away from this talk, is that you can design for your families, for your friends, for your communities, a game night where you play some games, and you know how it is with kids. They play and then they get into a fight. There's an argument. That's the perfect time to step in and say, here's why the rules of the game are the way that they are, or here's why there's a dispute occurring. So you teach dispute resolution skills, but it's done under the banner of a game that's interesting to play. The kids want to win the game. The parents aren't forcing the kids to play. I mean, maybe you have to force them the first time to go to the game night, but if there's an air hockey table and there's other things going on, you can pretty quickly get some buy-in for a large group of kids. Yeah, lessons, metaphors, right? You're encouraging the making of meaning. This is something that is inflationary. We talk about deflationary versus inflationary grammars at the Natural Law Institute. If you're hosting a game night, you are winging it. You're winging it. You're inflating the meaning. But here's the thing, if you have the principles of your family religion that you want to teach your children on a poster or in your mind ahead of time, then you're inflating the meaning to guide them to those principles. And ideally, those principles are not inflationary. They're actually, they're deflated. You've worked them out in advance. Yeah, and then the social and play circuits, right? Games just engage the social and play circuits. So you can learn a lesson 40 times in an hour rather than twice if you play through 40 games. Religion and operations, this is what I'm closing with. What natural law adjacent lessons can you put into your games? And maybe you don't reverse engineer a game because it's very hard to come up with a Lindy game, but you can reverse engineer the gaming environment. Here's the rules of where we start the game, when we end, how we cooperate, what we do when there's a fight, right? It's not teaching kids not to fight, it's teaching them when a fight occurs, what do you do to resolve it? And I want to just bring something else. up. I'm not going to go into the final slides. I have worked with 1,000 kids as a tutor, and there's a diminishing rate of return when you're introduced as a new, young buck into the life of a child. This dashing, I don't look that way anymore, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, right, I'm like this young guy. I go into your house. I'm teaching you math. I'm actually somewhat interesting to talk to. But that's only going to last for 6 months to a year. After a while, every new toy for every child wears off, right? So while I have that child's attention, what can I guide them to? Something to think about is that at a certain point, I can't order a child around or tell them what to do. They have to just want to do it themselves, of their own volition and of their own will. So it would not be very good, for example, to tell I don't have a daughter, but if I had a daughter, it would not be very good to tell her every day, you're not really built for warfare, honey. Your body's not built for war. Your body's not built for combat. You probably will be unhappy if you're a police officer. You'll probably be unhappy if you're fighting in all sorts of high energy combat situations. Maybe don't even be a litigator, whatever. She's going to hear that and she's going to go, Dad believes that women blah, 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 blah. And that's what she's going to hear every time I talk. But if instead we are playing war games on game night, and the games with the highest level they can be wrestling games. I mean, we have wrestlers in this room. You can have games that are both board games and then athletic games. It communicates very clearly and very quickly who is suited for combat in the room and who is not. Let them wrestle. The children will sort it out themselves, and they will send themselves to the games that they find interesting and relevant to them without you having to tell them, you belong here. You're suited for spades. You're diamonds. You're always selling yourself. You're this, you're that. It would be much better for children, most of the time, to find their way to those things on their own. And yes, as a parent, you have to be the guardrails and you have to tell them when to do this and when to do this. That's necessary. But I think a large part of the problem that, dare I even say, that conservatives or people on the right, if I can use that label appropriately here, we have trouble reaching the masses partly because we are trying to tell them what is right from wrong. And even if it's correct, if it isn't gamified, they're not going to want to play the game. So that's the challenge. Now, I don't know what that game is going to be. I think that's a much bigger game than I have brains to solve tonight, and that's something I want to get you thinking about, is if we are going to gamify natural law, how do you gamify that? This is maybe a 200-year question, by the way. I'm not saying that there's going to be an answer in under a decade, but maybe there will be. I mean, there are some pretty smart guys in this room. So I'm just going to cut the talk here because I know it's we're getting to the end of it. I had a few other slides. I don't think they're relevant for where the talk has sort of ended. So I'll just leave it at that. This was fun. If you guys have any questions, just hit me up at dinner.
I just have one question. Where does AD&D sit in the Spectrum games?
Wait, say that again?
Where does AD&D sit in the Spectrum
Yeah,
games?
there we go. RPG.
Dungeons and Dragons.
I've never played the game, so actually I wouldn't. But I imagine I was trying to find. I was trying to find. I want to bring up another game while I have your attention. You know, Settlers of Catan. I've never played that game either, but like I have a friend. Throw the pies, throw the tomatoes. Vitamin A right in my face. Carrots and tomatoes. Death by carotene. Nightshades, yeah, knock them out. Yeah, Dr. Garrett, I'm going to throw carrots at anyone I don't like for the rest of my life, thanks to you. But, you know, D&D, it's a strategy game. I think that clubsy type people are more suited for D&D. People who like leverage, strategy, right? In Dungeons and Dragons, it's not a game where you win by relentlessly defeating your opponent by slashing them with a sword or a tennis racket. Dungeons and Dragons is a game where you try to outsmart your opponent and then you gain leverage on them. Is that correct? Okay, all right, so I more or less get it. And it's a cooperation game, so you have trade in the game as well. Okay, that's awesome. So you have different levels of trade, cooperation, maybe even family. You can bring in family into the game.
You know, you can think about it as God trying to torture a bunch of people.
Great design.
With the false promise that they're going to actually survive.
Yes.
Just like real life.
Just like real life, Curt. You're describing my life. Let's go eat. Thanks, Francis.